This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. Now, it turns out that peacefully protesting and holding a sign like this one could get you arrested in the UK. And that's not hypothetical either. This is a recreation of a real sign held by a protester in Edinburgh. They were detained and subsequently arrested outside of St Giles's Cathedral moments after the proclamation of Charles as king while holding up this sign. Now, this sign certainly is provocative, especially during the official mourning period for the Queen. I'm certainly not endorsing it by holding it. But protest in the UK, especially peaceful protest, is normally reasonably well protected, even despite the controversial Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act. Now, even if you disagree with this sign, even if it offends you that it's being held so close to the Queen's death, that doesn't ordinarily impact freedom of speech and freedom of protest. While free speech isn't absolute, to say that you can't protest in a set window of time is far from standard legal precedent in the UK. The thing is that it gets even weirder, because it turns out you don't even need to go as far as holding a sign like this one in order to get arrested in the UK right now. You could potentially get arrested for this one too. So let's unpack what's happening, what Britain's laws say about the right to protest, if these laws are being undermined, and how someone apparently got arrested for holding up a blank placard. Now, the first thing to stress is that the incident I described at the start of this video is far from an isolated one. Since that arrest, there's been a number of other incidents across the country. In Oxford, a man was arrested and then subsequently de-arrested for asking who elected him at a proclamation ceremony for King Charles. Another protester holding a "Not My King" sign outside of Parliament was filmed being taken away by the police. And then a 22-year-old man was arrested on the Royal Mile up in Edinburgh after shouting, "Andrew, you're a sick old man," at Prince Andrew. So, just what is happening here? Well, contrary to some reports, this has nothing to do with the new hate speech law or even the new Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act. Rather, everyone so far has, in the eyes of the police, fallen foul of a much older piece of legislation, the Public Order Act. That's because both the arrests in England and Scotland have come down to the offence of breach of the peace, or the English equivalent. In the Scottish cases in particular, the individuals were arrested under Section 38 of the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act of 2010. That states that a person commits an offence when they meet three criteria. Firstly, they behave in a threatening or abusive manner. Secondly, that behaviour would likely cause a reasonable person to suffer fear or alarm. And thirdly, that a person intends by the behaviour to cause fear or alarm, or is reckless as to whether the behaviour would cause fear or alarm. Now, the bit to pay attention to here is that behaviour needs to be threatening or abusive and needs to cause fear or alarm to a reasonable person. And note, it doesn't need to actually cause fear or alarm, it just needs to be likely to. Now, in the English cases, it was Section 5 of the Public Order Act of 1986, which finds a person guilty of an offence if they meet one of two criteria. If they use threatening or abusive words or behaviour, or disorderly behaviour, or if they display any writing, sign, or other visual representation which is threatening or abusive. Now, for it to actually be a crime, though, they must then meet a further criteria that the conduct is within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm, or distress. Again, likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress, not necessarily actually causing it. Now, we're not legal experts, and we don't know the exact facts and minutiae of each case, and crucially, we don't want to get done for contempt of court. But it's likely that in these cases, it comes down to interpretation. Just what is threatening or disorderly behaviour? And just where do you draw the line at causing fear or alarm? Now, even if you put that disagreement aside, the guidance issued to police on Section 5 arrests specifically stresses that officers must assess whether the arrest would infringe on freedom of expression. and specifically stresses that making an arrest without first given warnings is a disproportionate restriction of a person's right to freedom of expression. Now, policing the proclamations, tributes, and subsequent lying in state of the Queen will be a truly mammoth task for police forces up and down the country. And despite plans being in place to deal with the death of the Queen for years, if not decades, it's still taking a huge amount of manpower to actually enforce, and stretching the police pretty thin. The former head of public order at the Metropolitan Police, who was the Gold Commander during the wedding of William and Kate and the 2012 Olympics, has already highlighted that the current circumstances pose the biggest security challenge of its kind that the UK has ever faced. Again, we're not saying that the police's decisions are justified by law, but rather explaining that the police may be being overly heavy-handed due to the difficulty of policing at such a huge moment in history, and all the security challenges that come with that. It also doesn't mean that this is in any way endorsed by the King or the royal family, as Andrew Marr quite eloquently put it on Good Morning Britain earlier in the week.
Right at the beginning of the reign, we have seen protesters holding up cards saying they don't want a new king, they don't want a monarchy, and a few people booing, and they have been arrested up and down the country. And I think that is outrageous. We are a democratic country. We are an open, disputatious country where we can say what's on our minds. And I don't believe for a moment that this is what the new king would have wanted. In fact, I would bet a lot of money the new king is equally alarmed and upset by the fact that protesters are being arrested.
Regardless of the reason that police officers might be acting this way, it's clear that many are troubled by their actions. In fact, the English law in question here has long been criticised for how broad it was and is. Originally, Section 5 of the Public Order Act made it an offence to use threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behaviour, where these words or behaviour were likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress. Yes, it used to be against the law to actually insult someone, something that none other than Rowan Atkinson, aka Mr. Bean, hit out against in a campaign to get Section 5 reformed. And even though insulting has now been removed, the law is still seen by many as incredibly broad. Section 5 was and is often used to arrest individuals for as much as swearing at the police. In fact, it took until 2011 for the High Court of Justice to rule that because the police hear such words all too frequently as part of their job, words such as fuck don't in and of themselves constitute threatening or abusive language. In other words, context matters. Regardless though, when it comes to the people who've been arrested this week, just because they've been charged for a crime doesn't mean they've been sentenced. Courts and judges must now take into account a whole host of factors, most notably the right to free expression. So it by no means guarantees that any of these claims will actually stick if the police try to continue pressing charges. Regardless though, it's easy to see why the police's actions have alarmed so many. Even if they're under pressure at the moment, and even if charges don't meet the standards set by courts, it doesn't make it any less concerning to see protests being shut down in the UK, even if you don't necessarily agree with the message or the timing. What do you think though? Is this a reasonable response to insensitive, poorly timed protest? Or is the police just shutting down peaceful protest using illegitimate and overly broad legislation? Comment your thoughts down below. And if you don't like being censored, then you can find more exclusive and uncensored TLDR content exclusively on Nebula. That's the streaming service that we built with our creator friends, and we can find a bunch of TLDR videos which will never make it to YouTube. You can also find a ton of our other videos there ad-free, and get some of our videos early before anyone else. Signing up also really helps the channel, and helps us make more content, not just for Nebula subscribers, but for everyone else too. So if you want more from us and support the channel, then you can get access to Nebula for less than $15 a year with the Nebula Curiosity Stream bundle. Let me explain. We've partnered with the superb streaming service Curiosity Stream, where you can find a bunch of great documentaries about all kinds of fascinating topics. Now, if you sign up to their service today using our link, then you'll get Nebula included absolutely free. That's both streaming services for less than $1 a month. A crazy good deal to get all of these documentaries on CuriosityStream and more from TLDR on Nebula. If you're interested, then the link is in the description. And thanks so much for your support.